Loken's betrayal. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Sargeras, the last embers of the Pantheon's power clung to life. Although Sargeras had destroyed the Titans' physical forms, Norgannon's grand spellwork had preserved their souls. The disembodied Titan spirits hurtled through the great dark toward the world of Azeroth and its keepers. There, the Pantheon hoped they could locate physical forms to inhabit. If they could not find such vessels, the Titans feared their weakened spirits would soon fade into oblivion. Upon reaching Azeroth, the depleted spirits slammed into the Keepers, who had been crafted by the Pantheon's own hands. The Keepers were immediately overwhelmed as the Titans' powers flared in their minds. They witnessed fragmented memories of distant worlds, of lifetimes never lived, and wonders never seen. But just as quickly as the influx of power had come, it dimmed. The Keepers, still retaining their original personalities, puzzled over the strange phenomenon. They knew they had been gifted with a portion of the Pantheon's powers, but they were unaware that the last remnants of their beloved makers had been infused in their very bodies. The bewildered servants called out to the Pantheon for answers, but they received no reply. The deep silence troubled the Keepers, and they sank into a long period of confusion and unease. The old god Yogg-Saron, imprisoned beneath Ulduar, sensed these fluctuating emotions. In the eons since the ordering of Azeroth, a sharp awareness had begun to stir within the entity. Yogg-Saron had devised a plan to weaken its jailers and escape imprisonment. It would corrupt the Forge of Wills, tainting its creation matrix with a strange malady known as the Curse of Flesh. Any Titan forge created by the machine thereafter would fall victim to its application. Some would even spread it to previous generations of Titan forged. The Curse of Flesh would gradually transform many of these infected servants into mortal beings of flesh and blood, beings who the cunning old god knew could be easily killed. To implement his plan, Yogg-Saron turned to Keeper Loken. Out of Ulduar's guardians, Loken had been the most troubled by the Pantheon's silence. Yogg-Saron assailed the Keeper through fevered dreams, stoking the cold fires in his despair. Yet, even in his disturbed state, Loken resisted the whisperings in his mind. Ultimately, his downfall would come from a much subtler place. As Loken drifted deeper and deeper into despair, he sought comfort from a Vrykul named Sif, the mate of his brother, Keeper Thorim. Loken often met with Sif in private, telling her of his darkest fears. In time, forbidden love blossomed between the two Titan-forged. Yogg-Saron latched onto Loken's love for Sif and twisted it into a dangerous obsession. The relationship quickly soured due to Loken's increasingly compulsive behavior. More and more, he talked of openly professing their love for each other, an act that Sif vehemently opposed. She knew that if Thorim discovered their affair, it would shatter the Keeper's unity. Ultimately, she broke all ties with Loken, demanding that he leave her in peace. The thought of losing Sif drove Loken to madness. In a fit of anger and jealousy, he lashed out at his love and killed her. Though racked by guilt, he could not bring himself to tell Thorim of what he had done. Loken scrambled for a way to cover up Sif's death. It was in this time of need that her spirit appeared before his eyes. Much to Loken's surprise, this visage of Sif forgave him. She also warned him of the need to act with haste, lest Thorim learn the truth. If he did, the Titan-forged were descending to civil war, and every pledge Loken had made to the Pantheon would be broken. Sif's suggestion struck Loken as devious, a characteristic he had never known her to possess. He sensed something strange in her spirit, an unseen darkness, subtle yet discernible. But Loken's fear clouded his judgment, and he pushed away his doubts. On Sif's guidance, Loken dragged her corpse into a frigid waste of the Storm Peaks. He informed Thorin of his wife's demise and convinced the Keeper that Arngrim, king of the Ice Giants, was to blame. The grief-stricken Thorim unleashed his unbridled fury, slaying Arngrim and many of his followers. This event ignited a catastrophic war between Thorim's storm giants and Arngrim's ice giants. Sif's spirit continued aiding Loken as the conflict raged. Her guidance became ever more extreme and worrisome, but Loken forged ahead nonetheless. She convinced him to build an army of his own using the Forge of Wills, one large enough to protect Ulduar from the depredations of the warring giants. Loken was even persuaded to punish his brother for starting the war. He berated Thorim for letting anger rule his emotions, and for creating such a terrible rift between the Titan Forged. Loken further admonished his brother, claiming that Sif herself would look upon him in shame if he could only see the things he had done in her name. This bitter condemnation threw Thorim into a deep depression. Overcome with regret, he abandoned Ulduar and languished in solitude. With Thorim in isolation, Loken used his new forged army to overwhelm the giants and end their conflict. All those who resisted his will were locked away in stasis chambers. But as these battles progressed, Loken noticed something unsettling among his warriors. A dark affliction suffused their spirits. Loken called out to Sif again for advice, but this time she remained silent. Dread overtook the Keeper as he realized that her spirit had not existed at all. She was an illusion created by Yogg-Saron. Though Loken did not know it, the false spirit of Sif had also tainted the Forge of Wills while the Keeper's was creating his army. Yogg-Saron's curse of flesh had taken root in the heart of the machine's creation matrix. Loken had, in his selfishness, allowed Yogg-Saron to play him as an unwitting pawn. This discovery shattered the last vestige of Loken's noble heart. He became obsessed with keeping the transgression a secret, even if it meant embracing the power of Yogg-Saron. With such might in his command, he knew he could defeat the remaining Keepers and destroy all evidence of his wrongdoing. The sealing of the Halls of Valor. In order to defeat the other Keepers, Loken realized that he would first have to neutralize Odin and his mighty Valarjar army. But a direct attack against their floating citadel, the Halls of Valor, would be impossible. Instead, Loken took a more insidious approach. He reached out to Odin's adopted daughter, Valkyr Helja. For millennia, Helja had dutifully followed Odin's commands, transporting the spirits of slain Vrykul to the Halls of Valor. Yet, even while she did so, Helja nursed the cold anger that stirred in her phantom heart. She never forgave Odin for turning her into a Valkyr against her will. Helja dreamed of a day when she might avenge what had been done to her, and the others who had been transformed into Valkyr. Loken called out to Helja and played on her simmering anger and feelings of betrayal. He promised he would break the chains of servitude that bound her to follow Odin's will. In exchange, she would seal off the Halls of Valor from the world forever. Thereafter, Helja could usurp Odin's role as the caretaker of all Vrykul spirits. Enticed by this change to state her appetite for revenge, she agreed to Loken's plans. After Loken had restored her free will, Helja called on the same power she used to secure the elemental plane in ages past. She bent the latent arcane energy swirling around Azeroth to her command, sealing off the Halls of Valor and the inhabitants within. Odin and his multi-Valarjar struggled desperately to escape their floating citadel, but they could not break the impregnable barrier Helja had created. There, the Valarjar and the Keeper would remain, trapped within the golden corridors of the Halls of Valor for ages to come. Helja, now liberated from her life of servitude, forged a new home for herself and the other Valkyr. She created this enchanted refuge far below the Halls of Valor, binding it to Azeroth's great seas. The ocean mist soon coiled up to envelop Helja's domain and shroud it from sight. Known as Helheim, this realm would become the final destination for many Vrykul spirits after death. Yet, the darkness that had long festered in Helja's heart transformed Helheim into a place of nightmare and shadow. The souls of dead Vrykul who arrived there soon found themselves turned into vengeful, wrath-like beings. These cursed spirits were known as the Kvaldir. They became one with the ocean mists, bound to the ebb and flow of the tides. The eternal fire of malice and anguish that burned in their souls would drive the Kvaldir to raid and plunder the shores of Kalimdor for all eternity. The fall of the Keepers. With Odin and his Valajar sealed away, Loken returned to Ulduar. He believed he now had ample time to orchestrate the downfall of the other Keepers, yet he soon discovered a new threat to his plans. Mimiron had begun investigating strange anomalies in Loken's new Titan Forged. The brilliant Keeper suspected that the malfunction within the Forge of Wills was to blame for the impurities he had observed. Before he could pursue his theory, Loken sabotaged the Keeper's workshop, killing Mimiron in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Mimiron, however, was not completely dead. Mimiron's faithful mechagnomes discovered that their master spirit lived on. They scrambled to build a giant mechanized body to house the Keeper's fading soul. This heroic act saved Mimiron, but he was never again the same. His brush with death had broken his mind. He secluded himself in Ulduar's vast workshops, spending his days lost in the inner workings of clockwork inventions. Knowing Mimiron's fate would raise suspicion among the other Keepers, Loken dispatched his army to neutralize his remaining brethren. First, Loken confronted Freya at her verdant domain within the Storm Peaks, the Temple of Life. Battle raged between the two Keepers and their followers, sundering the temple and bleeding its precious life energies dry. Freya struggled valiantly against her foes, but she ultimately fell to Loken and the shadowy powers Yogg-Saron had granted him. Yogg-Saron itself seized on Freya's weakened state, enthralling her spirit. The old god compelled the broken Freya to withdraw into the halls of Ulduar. There, she would spend her forlorn days tending to a sprawling garden at the heart of the fortress. As Loken confronted Freya, another group of his Titan Forged waged war on the mighty keeper Hodir within his lair, the Temple of Winter. Two fire giants named Ignis and Volkan led the assault. They enveloped the temple in blistering infernos, sapping Hodir's wintry strength and decimating his icy followers. Loken later arrived to subdue Hodir directly, a task he completed with ease. Just as it had done with Freya, Yogg-Saron warped Hodir's mind. The entity forced the Keeper to retreat into the frigid chambers within Ulduar, where he would remain in seclusion for millennia. Two of the remaining Keepers, Tyr and Arcadas, did not fall victim to Loken's schemes. Tyr had long suspected that the darkness was growing within the fallen Keeper, a suspicion that was confirmed when they witnessed Loken's attack on Hodir. Yet, Tyr was in no position to confront Loken directly. Throngs of the fallen Keeper's loyal Titan Forge stalked the stormy peaks and the halls of Ulduar. Knowing he stood little chance against this army, Tyr took Arcadas and their close friend, a Titan Forged giantess named Ironia, to the outskirts of the Storm Peaks. Among the icy cliffs they waited and watched Loken's schemes unfold, planning their next move. Loken dispatched his forces to hunt down Tyr and his companions. These Titan Forged scoured the mountains and caves of the Storm Peaks, but they never found their prey. Believing that Tyr and his allies had fled the region, Loken asserted the sole dominion over Ulduar. He altered the machineries within the fortress and used them to anoint himself the new prime designate of Azeroth. He also disabled the tainted Forge of Wills and banished many of his servants to the Storm Peaks. Thereafter, he sealed off the sprawling fortress of Ulduar. Loken languished in regret within Ulduar's silent halls. Despite everything he had accomplished, he was ever fearful that the Pantheon and their appointed watcher Alganon would one day return to Azeroth. If that happened, they would discover Loken's horrific crimes and punish him. But in truth, the greatest threat was right beneath Loken's feet. No longer under the watchful eyes of Ulduar's jailers, Yogg-Saron began to stir, working to free itself from its impregnable prison.